Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a video intended mostly for, well, I suppose for two purposes. I was asked on live stream recently if I would do a speculation video on what I expect Skaven would be getting, and I've already kind of done that a little bit in some of my leak videos and some of my previous what I'd like to see videos, but I figured, you know what, why not? I'll do some speculation. I also wanted to do a video, though, to essentially complain, because I currently think Skaven are by far the weakest faction in quick match. I don't really think it's debatable. I think there's no other faction that's in as bad of a position as Skaven. And so the replay I picked here, I think, actually illustrates some of these problems. Not all of them, but some of them very, very well. Skaven currently have a faction that struggles in a lot of situations and doesn't really have any situations where they are exceptionally good. So, to quickly go over my composition here, there isn't much to say. I'm not going to be commenting too much. I mostly just want to discuss some of the issues that Skaven suffer from. So in this situation, I was going up against Wood Elves, and I knew it. This is one of the worst matchups, if not the worst matchup for Skaven. I'd argue High Elves might be worse. Skaven have several bad matchups. This is just one of them. So knowing that I'd need to deal with enemy shooting, knowing that there's potential for my opponent to bring some heavy cavalry, knowing my opponent could bring monsters, all that sort of stuff, and of course he could go very infantry heavy and kind of meat grinder through my cheap chaff, I decided to try to bring a build that could counter everything a little bit. So for my main line here, I did bring 3 units of Stormvermin. I backed them up with Little Skrull. Not much to say there. Skrull's the most competitive pick. I don't have much else to say. He's got Raw Corruption, he's got Leader Bubonicus, Stand Your Ground, Pestilent Birth, and Vermintide, of course, to try to zone away my opponent's troops if needed, surround them, that sort of stuff. Pestilent Breath, and Bless with Filth, of course, or Pestilence, as well as Plague Rash for those debuffs. Alongside him is a Warlock Engineer who has Howling Warp Gale, Warpstone Armor, cool little ability here, Shadow Magnet Trinket, which grants extra missile parry. So all these Skaven Stormvermin are going up to 47% block chance, which I think is really good if you're trying to shoo off Way Watchers or Deepwood Scouts or any shooting like that. And then he does have a Doom Rocket, because I figured every little bit of damage I can get at range is going to be valuable damage. For the rest of the army, there's some Clannad Spears with shields, just to do some zoning work. Some Skaven Slave Spears as well, just to do additional zoning work. And because this is a fairly corridory, narrow map, I figured, you know, we don't need too much peripheral coverage, because I'll know where my opponent is coming from, give or take. Finally, we have a pretty significant shooting contingent, double Warp Lightning Cannon, multiple Night Runners with slings, 3 units of them to be exact, and then 2 Gutter Runner Slingers with poison. So, hoping to basically be able to outshoot my opponent if needed. Hoping to be able to pressure my opponent's troops and hopefully pursue a little bit with superior speed and all that sort of stuff. And definitely kind of going in with what was hopefully a balanced build. Now my opponent here decided to Vanguard on me, so immediately you'll see there's a horde of 6 Dryads behind my line. On this map you can Vanguard behind your opponent, so they're immediately going to start pushing forward. I'm going to be a little slow on the uptake, but we will counterattack with a Stormvermin and be able to shut them down rather handily, because Dryads, while they might dumpster, say, Skaven Slaves or Clan Rats, are going to do horrible against Stormvermin. They're also a good pick against Plague Monks for that matter, and other Skaven troops, but they're not really relevant here because we didn't bring them. For the rest of my opponent's line, a bunch of Deepwood Scouts with Swifter Shards, which have the benefit of doing magic damage, which means they do bypass physical resistance on all these slingers and all those units. It also does mean that these guys also do have huge burst damage, which means they'll be able to melt through my relatively low survivability. Otherwise, like, there's 20 armor isn't going to do very much for you, and 5200 HP isn't very much either. So these guys can definitely do a lot of damage very, very quickly. And if I had brought Rat Ogres or units like that, these guys can shut them down as well, because they just do so much damage very, very quickly. Essentially, a single volley from these 3 would probably level a unit of Rat Ogres instantly. Behind that, there are some Deepwood Scouts, as well as Way Watchers and Hellkaiser Jakira, providing additional fire support and the ability to essentially shut down Doom Wheels, which are really the only major counter that I could have the Deepwood Scouts. There's also a Spellslinger of Life here with Earthblood and Life Bloom, so going very, very cheap. And Orion. So Orion does have his Hounds, he's got his Bombardment, he's got a Cloak of Isha, he's going to be a very tough nut to crack. Now looking at the back line here, you can see my opponent here trying to skirt around my Stormvermin, realizing he has absolutely no chance at all of winning this fight. But we decided to we're kind of going to win this pretty decisively. There's not much to say. The Stormvermin are just going to dumpster the Dryads. The Stormvermin have very solid melee defense. They've got okay enough melee attack to bust through the Dryads with low melee defense. And once my opponent's troops are out, they're simply going to flee off the board for most part. Now unfortunately, some parts here are going to survive. You can see these Dryads here bust through, but we'll be able to shift fairly quickly and hopefully reposition to shut them down. So you can see already my opponent does get a little greedy here, pushing with the Celestial of Life, perhaps hoping to support this fight here. But we do get a nice little shutdown there. We're going to bombard him with our Night Runner slings. We're going to have Warp Lightning Cannons online to start sniping him down. And of course, Warp Lightning Cannons are very good against large, they're very good against cav, and all that sort of stuff, and they will tear this Spellslinger to shreds. So you can see she has a horrible time. She's not going to be able to get away, and she gets completely demolished. So a bit of bad micro there on my opponent's part is going to see him suffer badly. Now, at this point, you can see the bounce power has shifted slightly in my favor. We are going to be able to mop up these Dryads. Once the Dryads are off the field, definitely the bounce power is going to be decisively in my favor. But unfortunately, one of the big problems is that while Deepwood Scouts do have slightly less range than my Slingers, it's barely less. It's only 5 meters difference, and unfortunately, they can of course fire and shoot, so they can essentially fire volley and be moving before these guys set up to fire in response. So it's a bit of a problem. It's definitely a bit of a tough situation for the Skaven. You can see they're taking quite a bit of damage. Those Swifters melting these guys very, very quickly. These guys are already down about 2k HP. Same with these guys. And the Swifters are really laying the smackdown on them. And you can see we do have some routes. I think that my Warplane Cannon would potentially be targeted down by the shootings. I'd actually dismount the crew here, run the crew away, and we're now only going to come back to remount the guns. So we're able to apply some pressure. We're able to snipe down Orion a little bit. We're able to whittle down some of these Deepwood Scouts and these units there. But unfortunately, my opponent does still have these Weight Watchers in the back. He's still got some very safe troops there, so we're definitely not in the greatest spots. Dryads over here, you know, they will get mopped up. They're definitely going to get wiped out, and you can see we're doing a pretty good job, slowly but surely tearing these guys apart. Balance of power shifting pretty decisively in my favor, and we're going to throw things a little fast forward here as the battle lines are redrawn, as the mop-up basically takes place. You know, you can see a hail of pebbles there, zoning off the Dryads, the Plague Breeze, or not the Plague Breeze, the Engineer coming back, and we're able to save most of our cannons here. My opponent, unfortunately, trying to barrage the cannons down, not a bad move, but he's going to be able to take one of the guns offline, which is a little unfortunate. That it does mean that essentially a third of our firepower is gone, but it is what it is. You can see balance of power is now decisively in my favor, and we're going to be able to use our Clanrat Spears here to force off the last of these Dryads. My opponent has no healing, he's got no magic, and at this point, you know, he doesn't have much left. He's got Orion. We're going to kill another bunch of Dryads here. Orion does get a little bit of damage here on the Warlock Engineer, but then we counteract with Elite Rubonicus, and we're going to be able to sort of chase him off, and poor Orion really can't do much. But he is juking laser shots here because unfortunately the Warplane Cannon just isn't able to hit. One of the things is the Warplane Cannon, you can't micro your artillery pieces shots, but your opponent can micro his single model, and Orion's fast enough to juke. And he's a fairly small target, so he's able to dodge around there. Over here, the Stormvermin are going to push into the Deepwood Scouts, trying to zone them off. I was trying to sort of cordon my opponent off, cut him off, and force him to fight me. Unfortunately, you can see the artillery there, despite doing its very best, is not able to quite hit Orion. And we are trying to pressure my opponent back, but he still has all these troops. He's able to get nice little volleys in. We don't want to get overextended with our gutter runners, because that would mean that Orion can turn around and potentially score a fast tear out, which is really not what we want to suffer. And so, you know, we're trying to pick these Deepwood Scouts off, but we're just not able to score those hits. The Warplane Cannon is just not accurate enough. It's not good enough at killing off these models, and my opponent is able to just outrange me and slowly but surely chip away at my troops. Now, certainly these losses are nothing significant. You can see the balance of power is decisively in my favor, or fairly decisively. It's probably about 60% in my favor. We're doing okay. I'm going to fast forward here because, honestly, this match is very drawn out. This match, as you can see, is very, very long. There's not much to say. We are going to route these. Dryads completely. We get a Doom Rocket there. It's going to kill off a few more Deepwood Scouts, but we're just not able to really come to grips with my opponent. We're trying to get those pebbles into position. We're trying to use our cannons, but the cannons just aren't able to really kill these troops effectively. My opponent here doing a lot of damage to the Stormvermin, and unfortunately, whenever we deploy, we're just taking so much damage from the Swift Shore Shards. We're just not able to tank through it. So I'm definitely outrunning my troops a little bit here, which is a little bit of an issue. You can see my Warplane Cannons there. I'm just not able to reach a good position. My opponent's still chipping away at my poor Night Runners with slings, just completely demolishing them with those Swift Shore Shards. They're just so very powerful, and we're just not able to score the kills. You can see these Deepwood Scouts not doing too hot. They are getting melted, and my opponent doesn't have healing anymore, but nonetheless, he's just doing so much damage to my Slingers, and I'm not really able to do very much about it. They're actually going to rout here. Skrulk, you can see juking around. Now I'm playing the juking game. I'm actually making my opponent waste some shots, waste some ammo with his Hawkeyes, but you know, it is what it is. It's a rough situation. We're not really able to force Orion off. We're not really able to chip him down. Certainly, our Stormvermin over here will decisively crush the Deepwood Scouts. Certainly, the Clan Rats have been summoned and are going to be able to apply some more pressure. But I can't actually force my opponent to fight me. So as you can see, this match is going to drag out for another 9 minutes, and I'm simply going to fast forward. There's very little to say here. My opponent's build, he's kiting me. He's wasting a lot of ammo here on Skrulk. He's not playing particularly carefully with his ammunition. Oftentimes, you'll see players play very cautiously with their ammo, making sure not to waste it. My opponent seems not to really care, because he knows essentially that I'm not able to catch him. And the problem is that right now, because he does have a terror-causing unit, I can't actually cordon him off. And you could say, yeah, if I had clan rats or something, if I had more chaff, I could cut him off more effectively, but I can't, because it's Orion. Orion causes fear and terror. He's simply going to instantly rout these troops. He'd rout clan rats much more easily. So I'm just simply have no real way of preventing my opponent from escaping, because he's got Orion as essentially a bunker buster. Now we are able to catch him a little bit here, do some damage to the Hawkeyes. The problem is my opponent is essentially able to keep kiting me. You can see the cannon's starting to run out of ammo. I should try to use the Stormman to zone my opponent off. Certainly he's running out of ammunition. Certainly he's not going to be able to win here in the ammunition game, but he is simply able to kite me. You can see once again the Hawkeye's drawing up, trying to get some shots. We're going to be trying to bait some shots out of him with Skrulk. It's a bit of a juking game. We get some laser shots into them. You can see the cannons picking off a handful of models. We get a summon, once again picking off some models. There's not much to say here. It's simply a slugfest. These Hawkeyes are going to run out of ammo. Like I said, my opponent not being particularly cautious with his ammo usage. You can see Orion there taking a bunch of hits, but because he has Cloak of Asia and the Warplaning cannons are not all that accurate, they took a nerf to accuracy, which I think was a horrible decision, honestly. They're just not able to do the damage to Orion to single models. And so Skrulk, we're going to retreat a little bit. Orion could probably kill Skrulk if it became a drawn-out fight, but of course my opponent doesn't want to commit to this because he doesn't want to lose Orion. So we are trying to use a bit of damage there. You drop a Rod of Corruption, do some damage. We're going to drag down the Hawkeyes, so that's a good little win. My opponent's starting to run really low on ammo. You can see these Way Watchers almost out. These Deepwood Scouts almost out. This last handful of Deepwood Scouts. My opponent's almost out of ammo, but unfortunately at this point, although we are actually going to force a complete rout, he's going to lose to army losses, essentially. Orion is still around and kicking. Orion, of course, is unbreakable, so my opponent essentially just cheeses me out. This last minute is essentially just Orion running away, because I can't catch him. I don't have any tools to catch him. The only tools that Skaven would have to catch him, I didn't bring, and honestly would have been useless in this match. So, match ends as a draw. And this is Lord Gainer is one of the top players on the ladder. I can't say I have much nice to say about this build or his gameplay of simply cheesing, but and I'm gonna I need to leave it at that before I become very impolite. But regardless, the point is, and my point here wasn't so much this. Wasn't so much the fact that my opponent here cheesed me out. The point was that Skaven, as you saw, are very easily kited out. Skaven have huge issues. Because of fear and terror, I'm not really able to effectively cut my opponent off, because if I separate from my leadership, if I separate from the main blob, my opponent is simply going to bust an area of my army. That portion is just going to rout, and he can just escape, vacate the premise with his archers. I'm not actually able to run his archers down. I don't have, because, well, my artillery is not actually effective at killing infantry. If I brought a Plague Claw, and I'm sure somebody might bring that up, it would have done very little. Plague Claws are not particularly great at spread out Wood Elf archers. My only choices would have been to try to use Rat Ogres, but Rat Ogres would get shredded by shooting. Or to try to use, if not Rat Ogres, to try to utilize Doom Wheels, but Doom Wheels would get shredded by Way Watchers, and to an extent be shut down by Orion. You can bring 2 Doom Wheels, but the thing is that with my opponent's deployment there, the Doom Wheel might be able to pile through the Deepwood Scouts. It would get slowed down in the process. The Way Watchers would destroy it. Even worse, the Hawkeyes of Drakir have Smoke Bomb, so they'd basically guaranteed to be able to murder the Doom Wheel. So essentially what I'm saying here is Skaven don't have actual counters to skirmish builds. It becomes even worse when cavalry is involved. In the case of High Elves, of course, especially specifically skirmish builds that can outrange you or match you for range, essentially. Certainly, they can. When your opponent is essentially like Empire, where they bring Outriders. Outriders can certainly be potent, but you can you can match their range. Or if the skirmishers are too slow, you can run them down. But that's not the case here with Wood Elves. That's not the case with High Elves. So those are 2 horrible matchups for them. But furthermore, that's not the only disadvantage Skaven have, and I do want to kind of go over a few other things. Skaven don't really have an answer to skirmishing in any proper sense of the word. Their mid-range shooting is far too short-ranged, and honestly fairly squishy despite their physical resist. and rather expensive to boot. For example, Dwarven Rangers, who cost 500, the exact same as Night Runners, are significantly better. Night Runner Slingers are significantly better in most ways that matter when you're trying to duel enemy skirmishers. They've got better range, they've got shields, they've got stalk, which Night Runners do not have. So they're in a much better position overall, I think, in this sort of situation. It's why the Skaven are essentially reduced when they're playing against a skirmish build, against any faction that has reasonable cavalry or reasonable zoning methods of shutting down your pursuit. You're reduced to playing like dwarves. The problem is that unlike dwarves, you do not have the tools to fight off the skirmishers. Dwarves have Bugman's Rangers. Dwarves have superior artillery between flame cannons, I'm trying to think here. Grudge throwers are honestly kind of better in some ways, especially because they're cheaper. They're significantly cheaper than Plague Law Catapult. They've got Bowman's Rangers, as we discussed, and they've got cheaper, more efficient infantry at just holding. Like Dwarf Warriors against Wood Elves, well, they're basically indestructible to any lower end Wood Elf infantry, and they'll trade incredibly well with almost any Wood Elf infantry. They can just bring Longbeards or Rangers. Skaven are forced to bring Stormmen essentially, because otherwise they're screwed against any mediocre or reasonable Wood Elf infantry, or in the case of High Elves against any decent High Elf infantry. You're shafted, you're completely screwed. Which is a huge investment. Stormmen are over 1,000 apiece. So you have no cost-efficient holding infantry. You have no effective interim ranged. Your artillery is not that good. It's definitely not good for its cost. And let me take this on to a further few points. And I do eventually want to get this to what I'm speculating they're going to get in the future, and what they will hopefully get as buffs. But let's take it to artillery and a few other things. In the artillery duel and against other factions, Skaven have essentially no hope of winning an artillery duel against any faction. They have to overinvest a huge amount to win an artillery duel. This is kind of a problem, especially because their artillery is some of their only solution. Is essentially one of their only solutions to units such as heavy cav, or which is one of the Skaven's primary weaknesses. Skaven don't really have tools to shut down Skaven. They don't have a lot of mass, or to shut down artillery. They don't have a lot of mass. Their only AP anti-large missiles are incredibly short-ranged. Their infantry routes very easily. It tends to fall apart very easily, which compared to, once again, I think ideal comparison here is dwarves, who have the benefit of their infantry holding much better, both in leadership as well as in sheer mass and armor and just soaking up damage and all that sort of stuff. They don't have that. Skaven just don't have that. Their artillery is not able to win artillery duels, which means they are often forced to advance and against basically any faction that is able to match them in artillery in any way. Even if your opponent doesn't out-invest you in artillery, the dwarf player can bring like 2 cannons, and there's actually a solid chance that he's going to be able to take off 3, 4 warplaning cannons offline. Same with Empire cannons, or Elves with bolt throwers. You're basically guaranteed to lose an artillery duel. So any faction that has artillery or single target or direct that sort of straight fire artillery, you're essentially screwed. You're going to lose the artillery duel unless you overinvest horribly. So that's a huge issue. Heavy cav is an issue, as we discussed. Skirmishes are an issue to counter because you don't really have the tools for it. And then the alternative Skaven build. The Skaven really only have 2 builds. Then one of them is the bunker sort of build. The other one option they have is a bit more of a rushy build. But for rushing, the Skaven have other limitations. They don't have cavalry. They don't even have any decent backline disrupt. The closest thing to backline disrupt they have is a doom wheel. And they have some summons, which is okay against certain factions, but against others it's not really good enough. Especially because Skaven summons are easily routed off the field. They come in, they're taking damage already from the fact they're disintegrating. They actually have a leadership bar, so they just get charged by a cav unit, they're immediately going to rout and run away. So it's a huge issue for the Skaven. They struggle to shut down units like that. And I'm trying to think. So for rush so they have. As far as rushing is concerned, they struggle from the perspective they don't have cavalry, which makes them incredibly exposed to getting overextended, surrounded, beaten down from all sides. Their only high mass units to stop cavalry is essentially Hellpit Abominations and Rat Ogres, but those can be played around, and Rat Ogres, if they take a full charge, even if they don't take a full charge, even if they just get bogged down against some cavalry, tend to melt very quickly. They're very susceptible to fire of any sort, and that sort of stuff. So Skaven right now are in a horrible spot, in my personal opinion. That does not mean you cannot win matches. That does not mean they cannot win in almost every game situation. That's one of the things I do like about this game, is that you can almost win basically every situation. But if there's one faction that is in a very grim spot, it is Skaven. So what do I think needs to be buffed for the Skaven to become a little more competitive? One, I think their artillery needs to be given some, and as well as what they need to be getting in the future. So I suppose first touching on what buffs they need. Now I saw an interesting post on the forums recently saying that they should get a mass increase tied to strength in numbers. I completely agree. I think increasing mass by 100%, for example, as long as strength in numbers is active, would be a huge buff for Skaven, making some of their lower end units much better, and making them much more efficient tools for zoning out enemy heavy cav and preventing them from compromising your backline prematurely, which currently happens all the time. So that's one decent buff, I think, there. From the perspective of countering skirmishers and counting that sort of stuff, I do think Skaven need to be given some proper tools for this, and currently they have essentially none. The Skaven, basically, their only hope is that they make you make your opponent run out of ammo on pointless targets, and then have enough left over to win. And if your opponent brings Fear and Terror, like my opponent did here with Orion, there's a good chance you're just not going to be able to win, period. So that's currently the situation with Skaven. So what do they need? Well, I think artillery, the Skaven artillery does need some buffs. It either needs to go down in cost, become more cost efficient, because currently there's no reason a warplaning cannon should cost 1,000 gold. It doesn't really do much, if anything, better than a normal cannon. And I actually don't know if it does anything better than a normal cannon. Let's go to customs real quick and check it out, because I don't actually think it does anything better than a cannon. So quickly running over the warplaning cannon compared to the dwarf gun, and the Empire cannon just is pretty comparable to the dwarf gun as well. So we can compare the cannon. So ignoring all the melee stats and the survivability stats, most of which are largely irrelevant, dwarf does have magic resist. So the warplaning cannon does magic damage, which is not really all that relevant. There's a handful of single model monsters that have physical resist against which that's relevant, but very few and far between. And there's also some that have magic resist, so I see that as a bit of a net wash. I'm not really against the units such as cavalry and those sorts of troops. The magic damage just doesn't matter. But then there's the problem of the warplaning cannon, which is relying on its bonus versus large to do the majority or a huge chunk of its damage. You can see it's got 70. Its damage is 280, 260, and then 70 bonus versus large, so that adds up to 340, 430 damage. So, or no, I can't count. 410. So 410 damage on there. If we look at a dwarf cannon, it's got 336 plus 84. You're looking at 420. So it actually does more damage per hit, despite the bonus versus large. And the dwarf cannon is better at artillery duels because it is smaller. It's got a lower profile. That's just a straight up improvement. It doesn't have splash, but the splash on the warplaning cannon is functionally irrelevant. It basically never comes into play. And what is there to say? The warplaning cannon is essentially just garbage for the 1,000 gold. There's nothing. It's completely shafting the player. Now the plague claw catapult is a little better for its cost, I will admit, but you're still paying 700 gold for the. You pay 700 gold for a grudge thrower. You pay 900 for the plague claw. You can't compare the stats. The damage output is practically the same. The range is significantly better on the grudge thrower. Now certainly the plague claw does have the benefit of a debuff. And the magic damage on it, I think, is a little more relevant against some targets, because you'll find physically resistant infantry more often, I think, that where the splash being magical does come into play. The only disadvantage will be against dwarves, obviously. So, nonetheless, it's not 200 gold worth of difference. So your artillery is worse than the dwarf artillery by a huge margin. So, and once again, this is ignoring the fact that you're just going to get trashed in artillery duels once more. So that's one problem. I think the artillery needs some buffs. I think it needs some buffs to accuracy and buffs and nerfs to, or not nerfs, but buffs to cost. The cost needs to come down. The warplaning cannon should not be above 800 gold. Flat out, it should not cost more than 800. I cannot see any excuse for why it does. Plague claw catapult should at most be 800 and probably be cheaper. 750 tops, honestly. I struggle to justify too much there either. So that's another thing that I think would fix things. Otherwise, I don't really think there's too much Skaven can do with the current selection of units without making those units overpowered or broken, that would make them more competitive against things such as kite builds. What I'm hoping is that and this is where my speculation comes in. I think the Skaven are going to, obviously, they're probably going to receive Warp sales. Those are almost guaranteed. And I think that is going to become a huge game changer, because they should be, based on the lore and based on what I think they had in tabletop, they should be able to outrange even Way Watchers, which would be huge. Having an interim shooting unit, even if they've got a low model count, even if it's like a 36 model unit, like the current Skaven weapon teams, if we quickly gloss over them, what do they have? It's 36 models for most of them. It's 24 for the Warp Fire. But I think we'd see, well, I don't know. I would assume at least 24, and it might be 36, like Poison Wind. So depending on whatever, one of these units. Regardless, it would give the Skaven a proper interim ranged unit that could actually zone off and scare off these enemy skirmishers. Could actually do some real damage to them. It would hopefully have a bronze shield. And of course with Skaven, the cool thing is that because you can bring sort of cheap infantry, you'd be able to zone your opponent away from your shooting, just get enough of a distance, and then be able to snipe them down with Warplock Jezzails. The other thing is that I think Warplock Jezzails, as well as Rattling Guns, would be a huge benefit against Heavy Cav. Currently, Heavy Cav tends to Shrek the Skaven because they don't have the greatest options. Their only real AP anti-large is either Inflexible, in the case of the Helpit Abomination, tends to get rolled over like Rat Ogres, is Inflexible once again like Stormmen and kind of costly for what it does, or very short-ranged projectiles, or very garbage artillery like Warp Blanket Cannon. So I think that the Warplock Jezzails and the Rattling Guns would be a huge boon in the sense that would give you some short and mid-range, really, AP range damage. So you'd be able to pressure your opponent properly, really sort of crack open some of that armor, really reduce their survivability a bit, and make them much more susceptible to your to your projectiles, to your just make them much more susceptible, make it much bigger struggle to shut down your lines and all that sort of stuff. One other thing I would speculate that Skaven will probably receive is wolf rats of some sort, based on what the previous leaks said, and I would hope that these wolf rats, or these giant rats, or whatever it would be, would help Skaven deal with enemy skirmishers. Now certainly Skaven would still, the rats would still struggle against enemy heavy cav. Certainly they would still be easily disrupted and easily torn apart. But it would, I think, give you some opportunity to pursue these units, zoe them away effectively, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's a pretty significant thing, or important thing for Skaven. Otherwise, what I would like to see the Skaven receive, and now we're coming into the field of simply stuff I want to see, not stuff that we have to see. I would like to see the Doomflayer introduced in some capacity. I would like to see Poison Wind Mortars introduced in some capacity. This is part of me, this is just the completionist in me, the fact that I just want to see all the units eventually. But I think the Poison Wind Mortar would be cool interim arcing unit. I think it could work in much the same way as Deathglow Bombardiers, but just with essentially double range. Because as far as I understand on the tabletop, it didn't have huge range, but it had respectable range. So essentially just get Deathglow Bombardiers with double range, which would be pretty sweet. Deathglow Bombardiers are not a bad unit, they just tend to get shot to death, and they're very susceptible to shooting. Which I think is a problem, but I think that a mortar, if you paid like an extra 100 or 200 gold for it, would be pretty cool, a pretty cool option. Even if it came in a smaller package, even if it was like a Warp Fire Thrower with 24 models. I also think the Doomflayers could be pretty cool, just to have a ridiculous sort of zippy anti-infantry, monsters infantry style thing. I'm not entirely sure how it would play out, but I think it would be cool. And finally, of course, Storm Fiends, just because who doesn't want Rat Ogres with like weaponry sutured into their arms? It would be pretty cool just to have, essentially it would be another monster's shooting unit, like Dushapti Great Bows, but I think it would be cool just because you'd have a more variety of weaponry in there. You'd be able to have some Rattling Guns or some flamethrowers and stuff like that. It would actually be pretty cool because it would really give you some much needed mobility to some of your weapons teams. If you're willing to cough up some extra gold, you can get a much more mobile flamethrower. A lot of the Skaven weapon teams currently suffer from the fact that they're immobile, and I think even if you would have to pay more for it, it could be cool if you had the Storm Fiends, this tankier, more agile version of them. So I'm pretty happy about that, and I'm pretty hyped if that would happen. That's what I would like to see. So those are kind of my things that I think Skaven need. I definitely think they need to be given some of those shooting units that would give them an interim defense. I definitely think they need some sort of mass buff. I definitely think they need to be given some buffs to their artillery. I think those are three things would be a significant boost to Skaven and make them much more competitive currently, as well as in the future once the DLC hits. I do apologize that this was a bit ranty, and I know this was a very long video, and this was because the match was long, I had a lot of thoughts I wanted to share, and I wasn't entirely, or it wasn't all that well organized. But it's thoughts I wanted to put down, it's complaints I wanted to put down, and give you guys an idea of what I expect, what I would like to see, and why I think the Skaven are currently the weakest faction, why I think they need to be given a serious looking at and some serious buffs and improvements. So, as usual, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining or informative, or perhaps you have differing opinions, or perhaps it inspires some discussion or debate. If you don't agree, or if you agree, let me know. I honestly would love to hear what you guys have to say, what you guys think on the issue. Maybe you don't agree with me. Maybe you play a lot of Skaven. I don't play that much Skaven, so maybe it's just me. But if you guys don't agree with me, if you guys have your own thoughts on the issue, if you do agree, if you have other observations, go ahead and share. I'd honestly love to hear opinions. I'd love to hear what people think. Otherwise, like I said, I do appreciate you guys for watching, for staying through, if you've stuck through this video to the end. And as usual, guys, I do thank you all for the support, and I will see you all in the next one. So, Wyvern out.